For this next step, we're going to be experimenting with adding artificial lighting into your scene. So this can be helpful when creating electrical lighting fixtures, abstract studio lighting, or night scenes. And then before we begin, we can bring the sun panel back and then set it to nighttime. Alternatively, you can also completely turn the sun off, but that's up to you. And then the lights are actually found directly to the left up here in the tabs, or you can also type lights into the command bar into Rhino. So there's two ways to add lights into your scene. The first one is here using the render tools. We're going to be using the rectangular light, but you can also click this plus icon in the lights toolbar and then choose rectangular light. And then just like a box or a rectangle, you can choose the width and length of the rectangle light. And you'll see this arrow pointing down, which is the direction that the light is pointing. So once you have the rectangular light created, you can actually see it's not showing up in the Enscape window. So this could be because of the properties of the light, and the sun is normally at an intensity of 1, and this is only at 0.3. And we can also see the color and the layer and the fall off type, which is essentially how it disperses into space. So with the rectangular light selected, we should also put it into its own layer, which I already created earlier. And then we can change its intensity. Maybe we can try 1.5. And you can see the scene's already becoming lit. And then we can click on the color. You can start clicking these to experiment them, and then click OK, and the color changes just as well. And this toolbar will work even without the light selected, but if you prefer to use the properties, you can also click up here and use the properties tab only while the light is selected to choose the light settings and set the intensity, shadow intensity, and the color itself. So you can experiment with how the different lights work, but the rectangular light will provide a pretty evenly lit scene, as you can see. And this can be helpful when you put them into lighting fixtures or try to simulate artificial lighting in an interior rendering or try to light your building from the outside. So after you've finished doing that, we can head back to Enscape and make it full screen. And then we can open the visual settings back up because there are settings that influence the artificial light quality. We can actually use the artificial light brightness to override the intensity that we set in Rhino. So we can also head to the image tab, and then we can contrast the scene however we want it. So we can really boost the highlights or make them darker. So after you play with the artificial light brightness, you can also go to the image tab, and there's a couple settings here in corrections which sort of match Photoshop settings. So the contrast settings or saturation, which sort of make the colors more gray or boost them in the opposite direction. And then also the color temperature in Kelvin. So for a daylight scene, it's pretty normal to have a 4500 Kelvin color temperature, but sort of the cooler temperatures, which you would see at night, start around 6000. And then after you play with the saturation and color temperature, there's also a series of effects, which I went over in the lab notes, which you can read up on. One thing to note before we go to the next section is here in the main tab, you have the rendering quality slider and the exposure slider, which you can set to auto. Both of these will affect the accuracy of the actual lighting in your scene and the reflectivity of your materials. So make sure you fine-tune those to how you want to use them before you actually render as well. But we'll get to all those in the following sections.